Okay, so what I'm going to talk about today is the importance of including drag in our understanding of the problem of men's cross-dressing behavior. Okay, now this is just a sort of representative drag queen. He happens to be a very, very famous American drag queen. The important thing is not what he looks like, which is very ordinary for drag queens, except it's a bit posh. He's a sort of upmarket drag queen. But the important thing is his name. His name is Alaska Thunderfuck. Now, the names are very important, and I'm going to talk about names later on. But let's just think about what it means that this man dressed up like this is calling himself Alaska Thunderfuck. Okay, we can take him off the screen now because I don't think we want to look at him. Thank you. Now, so the imitation of members of an oppressed class of persons, that is women, by members of the oppressor class, men, whether for sexual excitement or entertainment, is harmful and it's insulting to us. The campaign for gender identity rights by heterosexual men, transvestites, violates women's human rights by gaining access for men to all women's spaces and opportunities and erasing women. Drag is different in its effects. It is also based upon imitating women, in this case, ridiculing women for entertainment, and is being normalized in a way which makes this form of woman-hating central to male-stream culture. It is a propaganda of woman-hating. Both drag and transvestism, which is the cross-dressing of heterosexual men for sexual excitement, are products of the oppression of women. They utilize the hierarchy of gender in which what is called femininity represents the behavior of subordinates. The gender, in inverted commas, assigned to the dominant caste of men is called masculinity, and it's typified by behaviors which signify power, such as the right to wear comfortable clothing that conceals the body, to spread legs and take up space. The gender assigned to the subordinate caste of women is called femininity, and it's typified by behaviors which signify subordinate status, such as being required to show the body and please the dominant caste sexually, to wear fetishes that men find pleasing, to keep legs together and not take up space. There is often confusion about this. We're encouraged to believe that masculinity and femininity are natural and will always exist, at least in some form, and that all we need to do is loosen up the constraints of gender so that men can wear high heels, for instance. But these behaviors of domination and subordination will only exist so long as women's oppression continues. When women's oppression ends, many behaviors that are not related to domination and submission will be performed by anyone regardless of sex. But certain behaviors that signify women's subordination will cease to exist, such as crippling and humiliating clothing. The imitation of women in drag and transvestism consists of the performance of the behaviors which these men consider to represent women's subordination and inferiority. That's what makes them masochistically sexually exciting or entertaining. Under male domination, women, to express femininity, are required to fashion their appearance to signal their subordination and sexually excite the dominant caste, i.e. men. Enormous pressure and forces of power are employed to ensure that women are seen as completely different from and inferior to men. This difference, a difference in power, is demonstrated in all of those clothing and appearance norms that represent the gender of femininity, i.e. the behavior of the subordinate class. I want to go through a few of these forms of subordinate behavior. One of these is nakedness. Women must signal their inferiority by revealing parts of their bodies, and these change from year to year at the whim of the fashion industry and under the influence of pornography. The naked parts may be breasts, backs, buttocks. A few years ago, it was important to reveal the crack at the beginning of the buttocks, called buttock cleavage. But men can also be excited by toe cleavage, meaning the glimpse of toes that are revealed by low-cut shoes. The parts most often revealed are legs, which women must reveal with short skirts or short skirts that split up the side or the front. As I explain in my book, Beauty and Misogyny, where I talk about all of these things, in many cultures, the right to be fully clothed is associated with power. Having clothing removed is associated with humiliation and inferior status. Now, I want to talk about wearing the fetish. An important aspect of the gender or sex stereotyping of women is that we are required to wear on our bodies the fetishes that create particular excitement in men. Many men, for instance, are trichophiliacs, excited to various extents by hair. The paraphilia is called trichophilia. Some men can ejaculate as soon as they touch it. To service this paraphilia, most women today have long hair, often embellished with hair extensions to make the fetish object more exciting. It was not so in the 1970s and for some time after that. I can remember the moment I looked around my lecture room and saw that almost every single student had long hair, uncomfortable and awkward, hard to care for, and dangerous if men chose to grab it, so that women cannot get away. The other main fetish item that women are required to wear takes the form of high-heeled pointy-toed shoes. If you read the literature of male foot and shoe fetishists, it explains the excitement of these crippling shoes. Men like the fact that they cause pain and put women off balance so that they cannot run, walk, or feel anchored to the ground, and it makes buttocks and breasts jiggle up and down. Men require women to wear them, but also many masochistic men wear them themselves. I'll say a little bit about makeup. Another gender or sex stereotype imposed upon women is the need to wear makeup. Women are required to wear makeup to make them more attractive to men. Lipstick, for instance, makes the lips resemble engorged vulva and is attributed by some sexologists to the advertising practices of prostituted women in the ancient Near East, which in fact Kathleen was talking about earlier in this seminar. It signified the availability of oral sex. Blusher on women's cheeks represents sexual arousal and so on. But the practice represents subordination too. Women are expected to cover, either by using a veil or by using makeup if they go out in public. Women who refuse makeup and go about barefaced can be seen as brazen, insubordinate, involved in barefaced cheek. Now, we need to, and the WHRC is committed to, the abolition of gender. In order to gain women's liberation, we need to abolish gender. If women were not required to wear our subordination, but could all wear comfortable, loose clothing that covers the body and flat shoes with comfortably short and easy to care for hair, just like men, the dominant caste, are allowed to do, drag and transvestism would be difficult to imagine. What would these men be able to imitate if women wore comfortable and dignified clothing and looked capable of climbing trees to rescue their cat if they needed to? There would be nothing. Drag and transvestism are practices in which men assume the appearance norms required for women, often in absurdly exaggerated forms, because they represent subordination and because these men are sexually turned on by them. It is a problem that many women see these appearance requirements as somehow natural to women and do not recognize that they are politically constructed. As a result, many children are brought up in households where women are entirely clothed in these harmful stereotypes. Girls are taught to imitate them and boys to think that they represent what women are. The norms are taught in schools where female staff may have long hair, high heels, and short skirts. Influential women such as entertainment icons, TV news readers, and politicians wear very exaggerated fetish costumes. Whilst women are disabled, humiliated, sexualized, and marked out as inferior by the requirements of gender, there will be men who seek to employ these harmful practices for their masochistic excitements. The abolition of gender is a fundamental part of our struggle, and a very hard one, because the gendering of women is so deeply rooted and so accepted. In transvestism, men do not just imitate women's appearance and clothing norms, but women's bodily functions too, pretending to menstruate, pretending to be pregnant, and many carry out mutilations to their bodies to create women's faces or breasts. In drag, though, it is generally just the appearance norms that are imitated. While men's transvestism is a sexual paraphilia carried out for the purpose of the sexual excitement of masochism, drag is carried out for entertainment and to attract sexual attention from other men. When men, members of the dominant caste, wear the required clothing of the inferior caste, this causes laughter because it is incongruous and seen as absurd. In the rare situations where women imitate men for entertainment, this is not immediately hilarious because women are imitating power. They are cheeky, but not amusing in the same way. Some men who do drag go on to transgender and claim they're really women, but most do not. They return to their men's apparel when they exit the venues in which they perform, and they travel on public transport as men. But in both cases, transvestism and drag, men adopt the practices that mark women as subordinate. There's another difference between these two practices in which men adopt feminine gender. When men and boys are effeminized in the practice of drag, it is generally for the purpose of prostitution. In many cultures, certain boys and young men are effeminized for use by other men who like to see themselves as heterosexual in prostitution. This happens in India with the hijra. Vulnerable boys are lured into hijra prostitution houses where they will be castrated and organized in prostitution by pimps. The pimps are called gurus, and the prostituted boys who have to hand over all the money they earn are called disciples. Newly castrated boys are sometimes auctioned to the highest bidder, and fair boys are worth most. In Thailand, ladyboys, and in Brazil, travestis are all involved in traditional forms of prostitution. This effeminizing of boys and men is less organized in the UK and the US, but is still an institution. It takes place because it maintains the masculinity of the men who use them. Some of the effeminate boys who progress through being drag queens into being transgendered, such as Paris Lees, for instance, are upfront about their careers in prostitution. In the West, the culture of effeminized boys and men who are commonly prostituted is called drag. I want to talk about the culture of drag. Gay men have engaged in cross-dressing over many centuries in places of entertainment connected with homosexual prostitution, such as molly houses in London from the 17th century onwards. A moll was seen as a lower class woman, usually in prostitution, and the male mollies were those who played an inferior part, servicing the superior group, who maintained heterosexual status by using pseudo-women. In male-dominant culture, male homosexuality has regularly been associated with femininity because real men cannot be homosexual. As a result, some gay men have adopted what they see as feminine behaviors to signify an embrace of their degraded status. This culture of gay male cross-dressing persisted and became what we now know as drag. In the 1960s and 70s, gay men did drag performances in a few pubs in London, mainly for other gay men. It was an underground culture of woman-hating. But nowadays, drag has been normalized. Men in drag have become staples of popular entertainment, and drag has become extremely significant in popular culture. Today, the hit show Rupaul's Drag Race, which started in 2010, in which men dress up as women to compete for prizes, has a number of spin-offs, and 2 collections of academic articles simply on this show have already been published. There are many similar shows that have been commissioned to imitate it. The expression of hatred towards women in drag performance is routine. A good example is what takes place in Rupaul's Drag Race. Apparently the word fishy is much used. Fish is a word from a woman-hating gay male culture and refers to women according to the supposed smell of women's genitals. The framework for judging the show is composed of a 4-letter word, which is insulting precisely because it relates to women's genitals. Charisma, uniqueness, nerve, and talent, i.e. C-U-N-T. Like transvestites, drag queens are everywhere in popular culture, incorporated into many kinds of television programs and widely paraded in magazines and newspapers. In Portrait Artist of the Year on Sky Arts last month, a drag queen called The Vivian was one of the models, crossing his well-muscled legs in nylons and high-heeled shoes. He was hard to paint because his face was so covered in makeup, but the artist found it difficult to see any features. Vivian describes himself as a professional drag queen and, like many others, makes his living from degrading imitations of women. Now I want to go on to talk about drag queen story time, because another result of the normalization of drag is the existence of drag queen story hours in which drag queens read books to very young children and toddlers in publicly funded cultural institutions such as libraries, museums, and galleries. Yes, so this is a drag queen. There are many varieties of them. And this one is apparently showing his crotch to children. I don't know whether he had knickers on. That is not explained in the picture, but you see all the young children being indoctrinated in the values of drag culture. Now, drag queen story hour is a recent phenomenon. In the UK, it originated in Bristol, where it was set up for Bristol Pride 2017 and modelled on the drag queen story time in California. The Drag Queen Story Hours organisers say they should be invited into schools because they're a progressive force for good, educating children about diversity. The US Drag Queen Story Hour website proclaims, Drag Queen Story Hour captures the imagination and play of the gender fluidity of childhood and gives kids glamorous, positive and unabashedly queer role models. In spaces like this, kids are able to see people who defy rigid gender restrictions and imagine a world where people can present as they wish, where dress up is real. The values of drag queen performers, though, are not positive for children. They consist of misogyny and the values of that form of male violence that is prostitution. The names of the performers are indicative. The featured drag queen, who performed in schools in Bristol, UK, calls himself Miss Beaver, a term used in the culture of pornography to mean women's genitals. Evidence of the involvement of story hour performers in prostitution is plentiful. A letter to the Suburban Times, a community newspaper in Washington state, gives a useful description of what took place at the Public Library Association conference in 2018 in Philadelphia. There was an event promoting drag queen story hours, which was presented by the founder of the New York City chapter of Drag Queen Story Hour, who calls himself Rachel Amy. Amy founded a trade magazine for the sex industry titled Spread, and the S is in the form of $1, in 2005, which is now defunct. Amy said of the staff of Spread, most of us are real sex workers. Among us are street workers, pro-doms, escorts, strippers, nude models, porn workers, and pretty much anything else you can think of. Many of the names adopted by drag queens indicate the cultural values of prostitution, gay male sexual practice, and the hatred of women and women's bodies. While a list of the funniest drag queens on the US Pride website includes the following: Anna Borschen, A Very Good Lay, Molestia Child, Phallic Cunt, Lucy Stool, and Olive de Cox. There is no evidence that Molestia Child has been involved in Drag Queen Story Hour, but the very existence of this in a list of funny drag queen names suggests drag queen culture that is hostile to children and at least permissive about child sexual abuse. The public authorities who invite drag queens to speak to children may be unfamiliar with the origins and values of drag culture. There was considerable controversy over the decision early in 2020 to invite a drag queen, along with the lesbian Scottish National Party MP Mhairi Black, to visit a primary school in Scotland in honour of Lesbian and Gay History Month. The local council said it had been unaware that the drag queen had sexually explicit material on his social media profiles. But his name, Flowjob, which references a sexual practice of fellatio, i.e. a blowjob, should surely have provided a clue. Apparently, however, he was introduced simply as Flo. The head teacher said that the children were keen to hear from members of the LGBT community, and top of the list was to invite a drag queen into school to talk about her experiences growing up and her job. Concern was raised after Flowjob's social media profile was discovered subsequent to the event, containing lots of pornographic pictures. Mhairi Black said those who complained were guilty of homophobia. I want to say something about drag kids. One result of the normalization of drag is the phenomenon of drag kids, which is becoming increasingly large. Drag kids are children who are inducted into drag performances at drag queen competitions and in clubs and drag venues. The most well-known is Desmond Napoli's, whose drag name is Desmond is Amazing. The child was inducted into drag by his mother, who said she observed him being interested in watching Rupaul's Drag Race on television when he was 2. By the age of 8, he was voguing throughout a gay pride parade and now dances professionally at gay pride events and clubs. As a celebrity, he or his parents make money from the endorsement of products, and at his performances, adult gay men tip him. There are examples of this kind of practice in Afghanistan and many other cultures. Gradually, more drag kids are being discovered in talent shows and exhibited in clubs and competitions and on television shows. Now, I want to explain why I think that drag should be understood as woman face. It's interesting that blackface does not come up as a spelling error when you are typing it. It is understood, it is in dictionaries. Woman face, as yet, is not. The practice of drag mocks and degrades women in the same way as dressing up in blackface mocks and degrades Black people. Blackface, though, is usually universally condemned as a politically incorrect practice in a way that woman face is not. White people in blackface would not be acceptable in any publicly provided settings or performing for children. The similarities, though, are considerable. The British Broadcasting Corporation's website for children contains a definition of blackface which is useful. It says that blackface is a largely historical practice which is seen as racist, and many people find it deeply offensive. Blackface was a practice in which Black people were mocked for the entertainment of white people, and negative stereotypes were promoted across the US and Europe. In drag, women are mocked for the entertainment mainly of men, and they promote negative stereotypes of women. White women doing blackface, white people doing blackface, we are told, would do insulting impressions of Black people in very exaggerated ways, for example, mocking their accent. In the case of drag, the accent which is adopted is camp, a feminized form of speech, which is historically central to gay male culture and persists particularly in drag. Unfortunately, drag cannot be said to be historical, as blackface is, because it's still in the process of being disseminated across popular culture and education in Western societies. The work of feminist campaigners against the cultural woman hatred that is the basis of men's cross-dressing practice will not be complete until woman face becomes as politically unacceptable as blackface. In order to eliminate degrading imitations of women and all the implications of this practice, it will not be enough to confine them to underground clubs and sex venues as drag once was. We need to abolish gender, the public performance of subordination that is imposed upon women from makeup to high-heeled shoes, without which the practices that derive from it would have no foundation. If any women are thinking as a result of this presentation that the rejection of femininity, the behavior of subordination, is just too impossibly hard, we should remember that the anti-corset movement by Korean feminists has led to many thousands of young women entirely rejecting harmful beauty practices. When I went to talk there last year, I gazed out over audiences of wonderful, strong women with short haircuts, no makeup, comfortable and dignified clothing. On this, Western feminists are well behind their sisters. Thank you. I wrote the book Beauty and Misogyny back in 2005 because all of the huge critique of beauty practices that had been made in the 70s and the 80s, when pretty much all of it, we all had short hair and jeans and t-shirts and goodness knows what, and but the practices were pretty much overthrown, at least certainly amongst feminist and progressive women. That had all disappeared. And we're now in a very, very difficult period where, in the West at least, it's almost impossible to criticize those practices again. And you're seen as being anti-women. And how can you criticize women if you say anything? I'm delighted that in Korea they're not having this problem and they're moving so fast. And I just hope that we can move pretty fast to getting back to attacking and critiquing and getting rid of those practices at the moment. But from the way it's going and the amount of incredible, horrendous high-heeled shoes out there, we are not doing very well just now.